Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ettore Greco. I am the Executive Vice President of this institute, the Institute of Affari Internazionali, Institute of International Affairs, and also the Director of its program on multilateralism and global governance. So thank all of you for being with us today. This is a meeting which we have organized with the support in cooperation with Microsoft. I wish to thank Microsoft for this support. And the title is the AI Roadmap G7 Priorities and Challenges. This is part of a wider program that we have been conducting on digital transformation and AI governance that we are conducting particularly as a co-chair of the T7, which, as you probably know, is one of the official engagement groups of G7, which brings together study centers of all G7 countries, which particularly work on the G7 agenda and other issues of global governance. In January this year, we organized a first event under the aegis of the Italian presidency of the G7 on the so-called G7 Hiroshima process regarding the International Code of Conduct for Advanced AI Systems, approved by G7 under the Japanese presidency. The meeting focused on how the process could be further developed under the Italian presidency, and in particular by involving the private sector actors, major stakeholders, first of all, of course, AI developers, but also major AI deployers, so companies that are at the forefront of the far-reaching transformation brought about by the AI technology and all changes that this transformation are generating. Let me stress that almost all major AI developers, including those that have signed the White House voluntary AI commitments, took part in this meeting we held in January. And in March, we also organized a second meeting in Trento with a similar format on the occasion of the G7 ministerial meeting on industry, tech, and digital. In both events, high-level representatives of the G7 Troika, so Japan, Italy, and Canada, engage in a dialogue with key players from the private sector, as I said. And this representative had the opportunity to provide important, in my view, feedback on the new steps that need to be taken to advance the G7 AI agenda. We have since organized a couple of other meetings and published several papers on a variety of more specific subjects relating to the transformative potential of AI, the resulting challenges, and the policies to deal with them. Such issues as management of data flow, the protection of privacy, the problem of how to ensure fair competition, and in this AI field, and the interplay between AI technological advancement and geopolitical competition. In addressing those issues, we have focused specifically on what the G7 was doing, could do, under the Italian presidency, particularly regarding the development and consolidation of the Code of Conduct, and more broadly, the Hiroshima process, with the support of other bodies, including in particular the OECD, which, as you know, has been working on several key aspects of the implementation process of the Code of Conduct, such as, this is the important component of this work, the mechanisms to monitor the fulfillment of the related commitments undertaken by private sector players. And this is also one of the central focuses of our meeting today. So we want to look to examine the state of advancement of the work which is being done within the G7, taking into account possibly also the other international initiatives. There have been, as you know, a flurry of different initiatives undertaken by different actors and possible synergies that can be established between them. At the same time, we also want to discuss what the G7 is doing and has started to do in the last couple of years in parallel to contribute to reducing the digital divide and foster AI technological development in the less advanced countries. This is the second major line of action of the G7 in the AI field. Clearly, the G7 agenda on AI is both developing and broadening. So it's very important to discuss the way ahead, how this ambitious program can be concretely achieved, considering this progressive broadening and deepening of the agenda of G7 on AI. Of course, as I have already noted, these need to be discussed taking into account also the geopolitical dynamics that are impacting this effort to create effective common tools for the global governance of AI. It's clearly the growing tensions and geopolitical rivalries are influencing very much and creating substantial obstacles to the advancement of this process. So we have the pleasure to have a very qualified panel with us today, which include leading specialists. Some will speak from this table, but other from remotely. And I wish to thank all of them for accepting our invitation. They will offer different perspectives on the subject that I mentioned, so this may, I hope, contribute to enriching and having an exchange of views that can be particularly useful for our discussion. But let me now give the floor to my colleague, researcher Francesca Maremonti, who is also a researcher in our program, Multilateralism and Global Governance, who will present the main lines of our paper, which are just published, is now available online. And this presentation, I think, is meant to be, to offer some inputs, a kickoff of our discussion. Francesca, please, you go.
Thank you, Ettore, and thank you, everyone. As you mentioned, I'm going to say a few words on the paper that has been published today, which is titled The G7 and AI Governance Towards a Deeper and Broader Agenda. And we're now heading towards the end of the Italian presidency of the G7. And so the paper provides an overview of the main advancements marked in recent years under the G7 umbrella. And it provides some inputs of what the role of the G7 could be and which roles could the G7 carve out in a very crowded digital landscape. We know that AI introduces a number of opportunities and groundbreaking innovation, but it also brings along a set of challenges. And in the paper, we identify, besides the risk that perhaps our colleagues today will speak about, we mostly identified two challenges. One being a very fragmented AI policy landscape, which resulted from the so-called digital powers racing for leadership in the digital domain and pushing for their models of AI governance. And this, of course, manifests even at the G7 level, and it may hinder a global approach towards AI governance. And the second challenge that we can look at, and that the G7 is looking at, is a growing digital divide, which is likely to feed into global inequalities. And we know that a growing number of low and middle income countries in recent years have joined the global conversation on AI governance. But we also know that the benefits of AI are expected to remain geographically concentrated, with the US and China, who are the main AI developers, mostly benefiting from it. And so in trying to shape the role of the G7, it is pivotal that the platform looks and tries to tackle these two main challenges. And in recent years, the G7 has very much focused on the first challenge, and it has cemented a normative role in trying to bridge these internal divergences in the regulatory approaches. We have seen milestones achieved under the G7 umbrella and a series of measures and principles that have been advanced under the Hiroshima AI process. And this has partially been integrated at a national level into national regulatory frameworks, like, for example, the 2023 US Presidential AI Executive Order, or the Japanese updated AI regulatory guidance. And this way, the G7 has cemented a normative role, which, however, still entails some degrees of challenges. And one of the challenges involved now, and perhaps in the next presidency and in the years to come, is how to translate these principles into practice and how to be able to enforce them. And I'm sure we are going to tackle this issue in our conversation today. But we know that the G7 has been at work in cooperation with OECD to develop and design a monitoring mechanism for the code of conduct. And perhaps this is really something that we are gonna have to keep looking at in the upcoming years. Now, when looking at the second challenge that we mentioned, which is the digital divide, this has been slightly overlooked in recent years by the G7. And this year, under the Italian presidency, there has been growing awareness and willingness to integrate this challenge into the G7 agenda. We've seen in recent years a growing integration of AI as an instrumental element to promote sustainable development goals. And the G7 has this year followed this path, and it has tried to make a first step in bridging the global digital divide and promote a more inclusive AI governance. And this resulted in a number of measures and initiatives which saw greater cooperation with African AI developers, and it materialized in the AI Hub for Sustainable Development, which was a joint initiative between the Italian presidency and the United Nations Development Program. Now, this is meant to be operational by 2025, so again, the legacy of this will be passed on, but it may represent a first step to chart the way forward for the G7, which is something that we're gonna try to discuss in the next hour. And so in this sense, when we talk about a deeper agenda and a broader agenda, we mean bridging both internal divergences and bridging external divergences and creating more cooperation beyond the perimeter of the G7. I think I've touched upon many of the topics that we will go back today, so I'm going to stop here and I will leave the stage to our colleagues. Thank you.
Many thanks, Francesca. Now we can start the discussion with our panelists. We have 5 panelists, so I'd like to ask all of them to stay within the time limit of maximum 10 minutes, so that we can then have enough time for the Q&A part. And I would like also to inform all online participants that they can at any moment type their questions if they have any question. And in the Q&A session, will of course take into account what you had written, and then try to invite the panelists to answer your question and make comments on them. So I'd like to now give the floor to Sharini Yaktiani, whose position is Senior Officer for Artificial Intelligence and Democracy at the German Marshall Fund, at the German Technology at the Berlin office. Her expertise is especially on emerging technologies and their impact on democratic processes, with a particular focus on AI and digital infrastructure. But she has also studied deeply, particularly the attitudes and policies of rising powers towards digital development and this rising question posed by the need to advance some sort of global governance of AI. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. It is wonderful to be here, and thank you for the invitation to IAI and giving me the honor to kick us off. So I'm going to structure my remarks talking about 3 things. My mandate was to give a sort of geopolitical lens to where we're seeing artificial intelligence today. So my remarks will be structured on 3 things. 1, what is it that makes AI so distinctively geopolitical? How it laces the current era of strategic rivalry? Second, why the AI revolution that we see today is so different from past technological revolutions. And the third is the implications for global AI governance, which I know something has been on sort of top of the mind of the G7 agenda. So first and perhaps most obvious, and Francesca mentioned it in her remarks as well, is how does it feature in the current framework of US-China strategic rivalry? AI is widely regarded as a universal force multiplier, meaning that it has the potential to amplify how countries project power on the world stage and also project their strategic goals. So whether it's defense, whether it's industrial competitiveness, whether it's manufacturing, both the United States and China have placed AI front and central of their national priorities. Most importantly, AI is also seen as a critical enabler of next generation military capabilities, contributing to the reasons for why both great powers are competing for a strategic edge in this technology. Both countries are developing AI-driven weapons, drones, missile systems, and decision-making tools, which can revolutionize modern warfare and can also result in possible battlefield advantages. This competition has also led to countries wanting to reduce the others' reliance on this technology. The United States, for instance, has reduced or restricted the use of exports to advanced AI chips to China. And China has also pushed for self-reliance in AI hardware and software. Like many other technologies However, AI is not values neutral. It's not just a technology that is a technology. It is underpinned by certain values, democratic values, non-democratic values, really depends on how it is being used. It is therefore very much a dual-use technology, and it can enable very different forms of governance. So the same AI technology that can be used to power a smart city or a safe city or facial recognition technology can also be used for the purpose of suppressing democratic freedoms, rights, civil liberties, and freedoms. So a lot depends on how this technology is applied and the rules that decide upon how it should be applied and how that use can be managed. Following the logic of previous technology revolutions, such as the nuclear revolution, countries who secure an edge in this technology also get the benefit to set the rules. And this is why it's very important for forums like the G7 to be on top of the conversation, to make sure that this is used in a safe and considers all possible risks. This brings me to my second point. I've talked a little bit about why the AI revolution is similar to past revolutions, but what makes it also so distinctly different? The thing about the AI revolution is that it exists in a very different global order than previously we've seen before. So as we argue in a report that we recently released at my think tank, the German Marshall Fund of the United States, a new global order is upon us. The world doesn't look like what it did in 1945, which was sort of the time when the Bretton Woods institutions were established. We live in a world in which there are many new powers, middle powers, or as we call it, pivotal powers, that are climbing up the GDP ladder and are indeed pushing for ways to reform the system that is more reflective of this current reality. AI serves as a meaningful opportunity for all these countries to want to create a voice for themselves. AI relies on a very diverse supply chain, and it's not only the great powers, US and China, who have access to the various points on this supply chain. In our report, we actually lay out the different levels of the AI supply chain. I won't go into too much detail here, but some of these include human capital, data, energy, connectivity, infrastructure financing. And so many other countries that are not just the United States and China have leverage on various points of this supply chain. A few countries come to mind: India, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, and the United Arab Emirates. These are just examples. So what this means is that while the current geopolitical contest may look binary, so US versus China, there are many middle powers or pivotal powers that are seeking to hedge via AI by leveraging their own strengths on the AI value chain to advance their own geopolitical ambitions. And third and final is really because of this distinct AI supply chain, many countries, while they may accept that we live in an era of strategic rivalry, they are no longer wanting the rules of AI governance to be left to the great powers. They all want to have a stake in how it is being made. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, for example, when came to Rome for the G7 outreach sessions, talked a lot about avoiding the monopolization of AI technology. And this is some of the kind of narrative that you will see coming from the pivotal powers. So I will stop here for now. I think I'll leave the floor to my fellow panelists, but I look forward to comments and questions. Thank you.
So many thanks, Sherini. And I think we needed to this introductory broad consideration, but very important ones, about the strategic significance of AI development and what they mean, particularly for the efforts of rising powers, but in general, major powers, to increase their power projection and the difficulties that this entails in creating and advancing agreement, common agreements and common framework for global governance. That's, we should take into account those considerations in discussing. We cannot just discuss AI and the regulatory efforts in isolation. That's very clear. So let me now give the floor to Karin Perset, acting head at the OECD Division on AI and Emerging Digital Technology. As I mentioned at the beginning, of course, OECD is a major player, actor in laying the groundwork for several regulatory efforts in the AI field, in general digital technological field, and in particular there has been a very important close cooperation with the G7, and specifically on the ways and means to ensure an effective monitoring of the fulfillment of the commitment undertaken under the Code of Conduct. So the OECD role has been quite important in terms of preparing the making, in a sense, very important preparatory work for normative framework, but also for the necessary involvement of experts of this field. Of course, this type of efforts require the participation of experts of different disciplines, and the OECD has been very important in this regard. So I'll give the floor to Karin so that she can elaborate on that.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you virtually today, although I would have loved to be with you in person in Rome. It's a busy week. Next week we have the GPay summit in Belgrade, so it's kind of a crazy time over here in Paris preparing all of that. But I'm very excited to talk about some of the work we have been doing and are doing to support the important efforts of the G7 on international AI governance. As you just mentioned, we've been working with the G7 Italian presidency this year to develop a voluntary reporting framework to help monitor how organizations that develop advanced AI systems are complying with the International Code of Conduct for developing advanced AI systems that was developed by the G7 last year, so by the Japanese presidency. But in fact, our work with the G7 on AI goes way back. It goes back to 2016 when Japan had the G7 presidency and tasked the OECD with developing principles for trustworthy AI. And so they really sort of triggered that work, but they were quite prescient because this was, 2016 was the beginning, was right after Lee Sedol lost the game of Go against AlphaGo, and so they saw right away that principles were going to be needed. So we developed those with all the OECD member countries and with partner in a multi-stakeholder group, of course, with partner countries as well. Many countries did sign up to those. The G20 did as well. They signed up to the G20 AI principles, which were the exact same thing. So it was quite convenient because it was a broader group of countries, and we've been working on different topics pertaining to implementing those principles since they were adopted through many different initiatives. But one of those is indeed one important one. It is indeed this monitoring framework for the code of conduct, because a voluntary code of conduct is nice, but there was an appetite by several members of the G7 to have a little bit more, to have more information on, well, how are these guidelines, this code of conduct, how is it being translated in practice? What kind of tools are being used? What is working, what's not working, and so on. And so they turn to us because we have an AI policy observatory that tracks AI incidents, that also tracks AI tools and standards, tools and metrics for trustworthy AI and different types of mechanisms to implement trustworthy AI. And so we can link all of those together, you see, on one platform. And so that was convenient. Now, I think it's important to say that the code of conduct was developed by the G7, but is open to a much broader group. And the Japanese and the Italians already have a very much broader group of companies from many different countries. Basically, I think pretty much all countries that have powerful actors, and so just to maybe to tell you a little bit more about this. Well, first of all, the code of conduct. The code of conduct is if you look at it in substance, is substantively quite similar to the executive order in terms of its goals and also in terms of its processes. It's also quite similar to the risk management framework of the NIST has developed, that the ISO, that's also very similar to the ISOs. I mean, in terms of processes. So it's basically a risk management framework to a large extent with specific goals. And so it can interoperate with other frameworks because all of the frameworks being developed are using risk management and risk management frameworks, which are pretty standardized at this point in time. Even though it's a little bit confusing, I agree. You did mention that different frameworks are being developed and using different words and terminology, and we've conducted a mapping of all of that, and it's true. They're similar, but the terminology is different. But you'll see the same types of actions in all the different frameworks, pretty much, and it also in a framework that the OECD has and the UN have, which is the responsible business conduct framework that has been applied successfully into many different industries. That's been in existence for about 15 or 20 years, and that has many signatory countries as well as an enforcement mechanism through arbitration and mediation. And so that also maps. It's slightly different in the sense that the difference between this responsible business conduct framework and risk management frameworks is that the responsible business conduct framework covers upstream providers as well before the AI system lifecycle. So it'll cover, for example, investors. It'll cover compute providers, as well as the actors in the AI system lifecycle, developers, deployers, and data providers, and so on. But it also covers the downstream uses, so the use cases. And it also includes a redress mechanism going through mediation and arbitration, which, in the case of harms caused by AI is very important, because you can have all the rights you want, but if you can't obtain redress, they're not that useful. And if you don't have the capacity to hire expensive lawyers, it also means that these rights are not as meaningful as they should be. So just to say that the monitoring framework is a good example of cross-border collaboration on AI, and it can be used everywhere. It promotes a cohesive strategy to promote AI safety, security, and trustworthiness globally, help to help countries and international organizations align their AI governance efforts despite competing demands. We don't, now it's not a static framework. We expect it to evolve over time. And it's not an accounting, it's not it's not a certification scheme in any way. It's just a reporting scheme, a transparency scheme that allows different companies to explain what they're doing in the same format and a transparent way, and in a way that that can satisfy their constraints, commercial competition, confidentiality constraints, as well as the needs of governments to know what is happening, what measures are they taking, what measures are working for what types of possible benefits and what types of possible harms. This framework is essentially an online survey, and we're working on it right now to making it to turn the sort of the survey into a practical online survey in consultation with a volunteer group of organizations from G7, from all countries actually, including non G7 countries, India, for example. And importantly, now the OECD's work on AI is no longer composed of OECD countries. It is integrated. We've integrated the work of the OECD on AI with the work of the Global Partnership on AI, which leads to a broader group of countries, and that group is foreseen to grow. It's now at present 44 members, including India, including Senegal, including other non-OECD countries like Serbia, where we're holding a ministerial next week. But that group is growing so that it's more representative, but is complementary to the United Nations, because it's still going to remain sort of focused on the depth of topics, specific topics, AI specific topics, while the UN has this sort of width, and global legitimacy. The OECD is able, because it has much fewer members, to go much deeper into topics, while the UN has this global legitimacy. And so that's why we partnered with the UN on a number of initiatives, and particularly pertaining to advanced AI systems and what to do to benefit from them and manage risks or eliminate risks where possible. So I think those are the key points. We expect to launch the framework sometime by the end of 2024. It might be at the French summit, on the French Action Summit on AI in February. So that's a bit of an update on the G7 work. Thank you.
Many thanks, Karine. I think it emerged very clearly what I just said, that there have been many documents and that many of the principles they include are similar, but there are also divergences, terminological divergences. There's some difference to be considered, but perhaps more importantly, this is just one stage. The other, perhaps more demanding stage, will be to try to find the appropriate means to ensure the implementation of those documents and principles. This is the important work that the OECD is currently doing, try to identify those instruments, particularly the monitoring instruments. So this is clearly a process, a work in progress that needs to be looking at and see how also what type of role specifically the G7 can play, and of course also I think it's particularly important that the OECD is contributing to, with this inclusive approach, these outreach efforts, to help the G7 expand, or at least provide a channel for the work of the G7 to be considered or also accepted or by other countries, including countries that are at the moment not members of the OECD. That's very important to emphasize, I think. So I give now the floor to Francesca Bitondo, who is Director of Institutional Relations of Microsoft Italia. And she has focused in particular on the challenges and opportunity of the private sector in AI governance. As I said, the one key aspect I would like to discuss at the center of all our initiatives is the involvement of the stakeholders, and how they can help international organizations, of course also national governments, to identify the most important risks, but also how to concretely then structure the instruments that can help to ensure a trustworthy and safe AI application of the AI technology at the different phases of the AI cycle. Please, Francesca.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, but also for the collaboration that we have had across all this G7 year. I think someone of you, I think Sharini, if I pronounce it well, was talking about dialogue, and this is really my key word, I would say, from this G7, because of course dialogue is not new, it's part of the G7 itself, but I think that taking into account the study and paper that the IAI produced, taking into account how this G7, and I need to say also the previous Japanese one, focused also on the private-public dialogue, I think we have advanced a lot in keep collaborating. And also the other piece of the puzzle is for sure also the dialogue with the think tanks, so also with the Think 7 that IAI also has been co-leading this year. And see, dialogue will be the key when talking about AI. First of all, because the technology is continuously evolving, which is a self-evident fact, but actually it entails that this conversation needs to go on to be sure that they can be reflected also in the policy frameworks, in the regulation, in the architecture, I will say, that is being built on AI governance, but also to really understand where are the needs, where are the things that need to be improved, both on the public side and on the private side. And when I say private, of course, I represent Microsoft, that is an important player, of course, on AI, but we should look at it across the entire value chain. Because if Microsoft is an important player, is a big player, one of the provider of artificial intelligence, it's also true that we need to ensure that that set of principles that the G7 as well as other forums are building should be embraced by all the value chain. Otherwise, it will be a half process if also the small companies, for example, don't adopt it, don't embrace. And this is true for principles. It's true for security, maybe even more, because again, I mean, we are all interconnected also on the private side, and also for the different things and different teams that are on the table. And monitoring transparency is one of these that Karine also mentioned in her speech. So coming to the G7, I think that one of the great outcomes of this Italian presidency was really to build on the work that the Japanese president started with the Russian II process and the code of conduct, and really add practice, really add some concreteness on that framework. And the reporting framework really goes into this direction. But also, I think an important part was related to the use cases. So we saw that in the digital ministerial meeting, both on the policy side and on the industrial side, there was a huge attention also on the importance of creating use cases and fostering adoption, because an important thing is also to experiment, to really start using experiment, because just in this way you can see the opportunities on the one side, you can see the challenges and what need to be improved, and really you can, I mean, the companies, public sector can really understand what else should be done. So I think this concreteness is a key point, and is a key point also in the framework of the AI governance as overall. Our approach in the AI governance, and especially to responsible AI governance, I will say, it started some years ago when Microsoft, it was already in 2019, established an Office of Responsible AI in Microsoft that now counts almost 500 people that are fully dedicated to responsible AI, which, I mean, you can imagine how important this is for us and how important it is to continue feeding this conversation. And talking about AI governance, the three pillars that we have been always focusing on is first the broad and inclusive access on AI governance as such. Second, the need to manage the risk in general, so also take into account the security features. And third, I think will be one of the most important challenges for the years ahead, is also regulatory interoperability. This G7 has started to focus a little bit, and always referring to Karine, she was mentioning just some of the frameworks that have been built on AI. But there are still others, because there are, of course, a regulatory framework, for example, in the context of the EU, we all know the UI Act. There are also national initiatives, and how this will intersect and how this will go together is really the most important challenge that we have now, so the regulatory interoperability. And one thing that for sure the Canadian presidency, if it will continue to work as I think it will, on what Japan and Italy has done during their presidency, will certainly deal with. So on how all these systems speak together, because the point is also that on the one hand you have regulatory framework which are of course clear, and it's a rule of law such as the AVI Act, but the importance of these forums like the G7 is increasing, because it allows also to keep the pace of the evolution of the technology. And that is why, in my personal opinion, they have also been acquiring importance, and also the interest, let me say, of the private sector side, because it really allows to reflect the state of the art of the conversational technology more quickly compared to a regulation, not referring particularly to the EU one, but in general. Of course, we know that the rules and laws need more time. So it's important, because I mean, we know now that if we take a plane from Rome to go to New York, we know that the systems, wherever we are, they talk to themselves. And that's exactly the goal that we should have within these frameworks. And how, of course, it's the 1 billion question, and where this dialogue keeps being so crucial. As Microsoft, we have been according strong importance, first of all, to skills, because while we talk about all this governance, there is still a lack of competences on AI, and in really on all sectors. I mean, the OECD knows better than anyone else, because they also have a very interesting observatory on the skills and competences. Really, I mean, this is something that we should try to push more, and to be sure that AI is really addressed in a purposeful way from both private and public sector. Then the scientific consensus, which is also, of course, very important, because we all know how definitions, how meanings, and how important to be able to address some of the topics in general in a meaningful way. Then standards that comes back to the point of the regulatory framework that I was mentioning before, and in general the regulatory architecture. And we have some examples worldwide on how architectures in general, regulation, not AI, have been advancing. We have some example from the international civil aviation that I was also mentioning before when making the example of the plane. We have examples of the international atomic agencies. We have at the scientific level the example of the Center of National Research. All that to say that, of course, I mean, there is no one model, but for sure there should be one that can be comprehensive, inclusive, but we should go in that direction. And so I think both the code of, in this context, the code of conduct, so the process entailed by the Japanese presidency and continued by the Italian one, is so important for this reason, and will be even more important to see the outcome of the works that the reporting framework has been covering throughout the year, and will cover in the upcoming months. Just a quick note, because I know I run short of time, also on talking about dialogue and continuing on this leitmotif, the importance of dialogue with the Global South. I think we should all reflect on the importance that opening the conversation of the G7 to other countries has had during this year. Not to be monolithic as a context, and it's true that there are others. For example, the United Nations, there is GPI, there is the G20, so of course the G7 is not the only one. But trying to open this conversation also to other countries has been, in my opinion, key during this year, because while we talk about generative AI and a reporting framework and a regulatory architecture, I saw some weeks ago a map of Africa, for example, where still 2/3 of the people lack electricity. So it's really, of course, this is another topic, another dossier, but also, when we talk about inclusiveness and we talk about how AI should take into account also, I mean, you should have an inclusive approach, we should take into account also that part. So again, I hope that this dialogue, which was particularly felt and particularly pushed also by the Italian presidency, will continue in the upcoming future, also because it allows us to focus on other aspects of the AI, such as, for example, infrastructure, talking about the lack, for example, of electricity. So the need to be on other layers, let me say, not only of the governance architecture, but also on the AI architecture, talking like a tech stack. So where exactly, besides application, besides adoption, we really are still behind in terms of inclusiveness for AI. And this was also part of the conversation that was held during a side meeting of Borgognazia, so in Puglia, the Leader Summit, where there was also a focus on, for example, on partnership of global infrastructure and investment. We were there with our CEO, and where this focus also was raised. So a lot of outcome, a lot of steps. I think that Italy, thanks also to the collaboration of partners such as OECD, has done during this presidency. For sure, lots of challenges for the new Canadian presidency soon, but it's important to keep fostering it, to keep building, I think, on what has been done, especially in the last 2 years with Japan and Italy over AI. Thank you.
Many thanks, Francesca. I think you touch upon many very important points. I would just emphasize two of them. One is the need for continuity between the various presidencies. So we expect, of course, the Canadian presidency to follow up to what has been achieved so far. And I think we can say that the Italian presidency has tried to make the most of the results of the Japanese presidency, which was really, really important, this Hiroshima process to strengthen the role of the G7 in this field. And the second, this is why also we ourselves try to have an involvement of the other two presidencies, the previous one and the next one. And the second point is this emphasis on flexibility. So this type of this dialogue with private actors has been successful because there has been a search for flexible arrangements, also voluntary arrangements. But I think this should be coupled with also effective instrument of monitoring commitments. That's more or less a trade-off, which we need to look for, and the real challenge. Of course, this is difficult also because AI development, we know, is a moving target. There are continuous changes, so it's difficult to elaborate rules in general. But this, of course, implies and makes it even more clear that there is the need for discussing continuously with experts, engineers, and also stakeholders to try to find the most appropriate solutions. So many thanks again, Francesca, and then I give the floor to Claude Thiven, who is the head of digital economy governance team at the European Centre for Development Policy Management. It's a very well-known study center, a leading institutes working especially on the relationship between Europe and Africa. And Claude herself has an expertise on digital infrastructure governance, the cooperation between African Union and European Union, and the geopolitics of development. So Claude, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ettore, and I'm very glad to be with you virtually this afternoon. Also sorry for not being there in person, but this time of year is a little bit crazy, and I had a prior engagement here in Brussels. But I think it's really great to speak particularly about Africa within the context of this conversation, because the Italian presidency has done so much this year to really engage with Africa. I'm trying to share a presentation now. Just one moment. So I'm going to briefly touch on African AI priorities and concerns, the evolving policy landscape in Africa, and then Africa's engagement in global processes, and particularly how the AI roadmap of the G7 can continue to engage with African partners. A disclaimer to start with, I think we do often talk about Africa as if it were a country. That is something that, is clearly that we clearly all know that there are, 55 countries with very different priorities and with, different levels of also digital development and engagement, even with the questions around AI. So I think that's an important point to start with. However, I think there are certainly in the continental documents and also in the digital development strategies and now the emerging AI strategies in a number of African countries, we do see certain trends in terms of the concerns and the priorities that are expressed. And thanks to my colleague Melody Musoni, who I really have borrowed a lot of this particular slide from. But I think there has been a strong concern around the absence of African voices in global AI policy discussions. And again, that's why I think it's been really great to see that the Italian presidency has taken this seriously this year and really engaged. Other questions around the extractive nature of the data economy, the global AI divide, the sense that the data is non-representative and biased, and that emerging AI use cases often do not speak to African realities, and I'll touch on later. But again, the Italian presidency with the AI hub for sustainable development, I think, has been really trying to engage around these questions. So really the priorities from the African perspective are questions around social and human development, economic growth. The environmental sustainability is an issue for a lot of countries, priority for a lot of countries, efficient service delivery. And then the geopolitics is very, very present in the African continent. And African countries, by and large, are keen not to have to choose one partner or one bloc over another, as we'll touch on later. Just in terms of the evolving landscape in terms of policy and partnerships in Africa, there are a growing number of strategies, policies, and frameworks at the continental, at the regional, and at the state level. So here I mentioned just a few of the regional and continental strategies, like the Auda-NEPAD AI Continental White Paper and Roadmap, which fed into the AU AI strategy. There was also the SADC Windhoek AI statement. So there is an effort within Africa to start to develop kind of joint priorities, but you definitely see that there are clear leaders in this process, and there are a number of countries that are more advanced than others. So this is from an interactive tool that ECDPM developed recently that you can find on our website. But we look at various data policies and data strategies, as well as the AI strategies, and which countries have now adopted AI strategies or are in the process thereof. So it does demonstrate that it tends to be often those economies that are more digitally advanced already, that are now developing AI strategies and trying to engage with the global conversations around AI by already having their domestic agenda set in advance. I think, Kenya is a very important example here, and I'll move on to the global discussions because I'm conscious that we have little time left. But I think it has been interesting in the last year to really see Africa engaging more and more in global discussions. not just the G7, but really there has been a growing kind of vocal global South or global majority bloc at the UN, through the G20 in India and Brazil, and next year with South Africa. There is a growing role there for African engagement, especially now that the AU is a member. And Kenya played a very strong leadership role, clearly with the Global Digital Compact, but also in the AU processes at the UN. Sorry, in the AI processes at the UN. But I think it's also important, we were talking about the geopolitics earlier, and I think it is important to mention that there's a lot of enthusiasm also from a number of African countries around new fora and new opportunities like the BRICS, and that there was a specific mention there of further engagement around digital. We'll see, if that actually actually leads to something more concrete in terms of engagement. But I think it is important in this conversation to talk about the fact that there are now a growing number of fora where these issues are being discussed, and there are conversations happening which are more and more focused on the rest of the world. Saudi Arabia held a big AI conference this year that had relatively little engagement from G7 countries. So, but I would say that, again, in terms of the approach from African countries, it is quite fragmented, despite the elaboration of kind of a continental strategy and efforts to build a more unified approach in terms of engaging, that you really do see that different countries are engaging more with different processes. So what does all of this mean in terms of the AI roadmap of the G7? Again, I think Italy's really shown how to go forward in terms of engaging African leaders and tech envoys, and showing real respect and engagement around these issues. The concept of the AI hub for sustainable development, with its focus on co-creation, is also a really important step. However, I guess the big question now is about sustaining this engagement going forward as well, and building on it. And also, I think there's a risk that there are a lot of competing initiatives from G7 countries and the EU as that are not necessarily complementary, and that don't necessarily engage Africa in a kind of comprehensive way. So I think there will be a need to kind of scale up and to engage in a kind of more comprehensive manner, which I think is potentially going to get more difficult as our politics gets more complex in the coming years, within the G7 countries and the EU more broadly as well. But there will be, and Karine mentioned, launching the framework at the French AI Action Summit. This is another opportunity for real engagement, and it will be. I think it is already the plan to have a strong engagement with the wider with actors from across the world. On the development side, there is the EU Digital for Development Hub, of which Italy is also a member, and I think there are synergies to be had between the G7 process and the EU's processes around thinking about AI development. And then there are other. Then, of course, there are the more global fora, and the need to also really be engaged there, and to listen to African leaders and African priorities at the G20, at the UN. and particularly, I think one of the issues that we're seeing really a growing call for is the access to compute power, and I think that is going to be more and more of a discussion in the coming years alongside the governance discussion. There has to be a bigger discussion around, how do we support a more equitable development, AI development ecosystem across the world. I'll leave it there for now because I'm just up with my 10 minutes, but I look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Many thanks, Claude, for this presentation, which of course enlarged even further the scope of our discussion, but this was needed because it was our task, in a sense, to try to discuss all how the G7 role is developing in this field, taking into account not only the normative efforts, but discussing global governance in a wider sense. I think Karine wants to say something.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with this interface, but since I have the floor, I'll just mention, echo some of what Chloe has said, and also mention that we've been working with the African Union Commission for several months. Actually, we had a workshop with them last week in Cairo. And in particular, the African Union Commission's working group on AI is chaired by Egypt, with which we have a very close relationship and have done a country study and is an applicant to the Global Partnership on AI, as well as are several other African countries. So this is so it's very relevant what you're saying. But I also wanted to mention that something that I think is equally important is that while engagement is very important, I think, and this comes from a prior experience I have working supporting 220 governments, so more of a UN type venue. It's more difficult to get to decisions the larger the group, and the more heterogeneous the group, and therefore, participation is very important, but meaningful participation is critical. And to achieve meaningful participation takes time, takes onboarding, takes it's not immediate. It can't be immediate, because otherwise you end up with countries in, for example, I was supporting the Government Advisory Committee of the GAC, 220 countries and economies, and the decisions were made on, political grounds, which is not what we necessarily, which is not going to result in optimal decisions in a really critical area for the future of the world. So I just want to flag that, while we do, while the global engagement is critical, it also needs to be meaningful and to bring up to speed the relevant countries. Otherwise, so that there's a chance to have positive results for humanity as a whole. Sorry, I didn't really know that I was raising my hand, but
Many thanks, Karina, for these additional remarks. So I now give the floor to Duncan Kaspex, who is Executive Director of the Global AI Risks Initiative at CG. CG is a Center for International Governance Innovation, right? This is a Canadian institute, so we are particularly interested in having your view, also for two reasons. First of all, of course, because the institute is very much specialized on analysis of technological development and global governance instruments to regulate them and to deal with them. And also because, of course, Canada will be the next chair of the G7, so we are interested in understanding how this work being done by the Italian presidency can be further developed. Duncan is head of strategic foresight, also the organization was previously, okay, head of strategic foresight at the OECD. So I have experience also at the OECD, and his expertise is on developing innovative governance solutions to address current and future global issues relating to artificial intelligence. Please, Duncan, you have the floor.
Super, thank you so much. So as the last speaker, it's probably appropriate that I bring us even more into the future, and I'm going to try and do that in two senses. First, speaking about Canada's presidency, and then also pushing us to think a little bit more about some of the future scenarios that we could face when it comes to this very fast-moving and impactful technology. So first of all, just when it comes to the G7, what we've heard from Canada's Sherpa and others, that of course AI is going to be a key part of Canada's presidency. There will be no doubt a continuation of much of the great work that's being done, particularly since Hiroshima, and then the work that you've carried forth under the Italian presidency. I would say that there is always a risk and a challenge that the agenda of G7s becomes sort of captured by the events of the moment, many of which are developing rapidly on many fronts right now. So I think it's going to be quite important for those of us working in this space to be really, maintaining a focus on continued progress, building on what we've seen in the recent years. Just speaking to CG's own role, we are, like you, we're the T7 representative, the think tank for Canada, and we will be hosting a process, a T7 process in support of Canada's G7 that includes a call for briefs that is out now until December 31st, I believe. So please look for that online and please apply. As well as an in-person meeting that we'll be holding in Waterloo, Canada in April. And then finally, another event, the T7 will be crossing the Atlantic from Canada to a combined event with the Global Solutions Initiative at the Global Solutions Summit in Berlin in May. So let me turn now to some of the real focus of our work at CG in the space of global AI challenges. This is work that we are conducting with a number of other think tanks and organizations around the world. And I'm going to organize my remarks under really three key messages that I'd like to leave you with. The first is that it's incredibly crucial that we look beyond the AI of today, and that we look to some of the potential scenarios for where AI could be going in the coming months and years, including some of the most challenging and inconvenient scenarios. We owe that as a responsibility for our support to public policy. Secondly, that some of those scenarios, in terms of where AI could be headed, raise truly global scale challenges. Many of the issues that can be that are raised by AI are issues that we can deal with within our own countries or among groups of like-minded countries, but there are some that will really require the world to come together. And then thirdly, that right now we don't have in place the instruments and mechanisms that would allow the international community to manage those global scale challenges effectively. And it's very important that we be proactive now in beginning to prepare, design, develop what would those institutions and mechanisms look like, so even when the political will is there, we are ready with some solutions that we've kicked the tires on, that we've thought through, and that would make sense and essentially be effective. So let me start with the scenarios. Now, this is a very fast-moving technology, and as a result of that, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. You will hear different tweets every day from experts with almost polar opposite positions on this. For example, one of the key questions, maybe the most fundamental one, is just what's the pace of AI capabilities development going to be in the coming months and years? On the one hand, we've had some recent evidence that potentially some of the current progress in scaling large language models might be slowing down. So there's one argument, one scenario that would be a sort of plateau scenario. This would actually be my favorite one. I wish this could be the case, where we would actually have a breather where we could actually catch up with our policies. But this would essentially see AI potentially continuing to grow, but at a slower pace. I would point out that even if this scenario did happen, even if we had a magic wand and were able to sort of freeze AI right where it is today or where it might be in a year's time, that is likely to have, even that, to have tremendous economic and social implications, just as that technology is sort of taken up. We haven't begun to squeeze all of the potential just of the current systems yet. So I think we would be due for rapid transformation, even if we're in this kind of very slowest scenario for capabilities gain. But then at the other end of the scale, we have also very credible AI scientists that are making the case that they see the potential for really an exponential increase in the capabilities of AI systems. Now, one of the mechanisms we see here is that even current systems today are getting very good at helping with the process of R&D, AI, of research and development in AI itself and speeding AI progress. And it could be that sort of the next level of scaled models that we have, a potentially GPT-5, could be fine-tuned on a number of key tasks in the AI R&D process, and that really, it means that certain things that would have taken these companies a year or two to do in the past can suddenly be done in 2 months, a month, and so forth. And we really get to that steep part of the exponential curve. Now, what would that kind of scenario look like? Well, I think Dario Amodei of Anthropic recently likened it to having a nation's worth of geniuses, of Einsteins and Marie Curies, all in a data center. Another way of thinking of it is that if we're able to develop an AI system that's kind of human level capability, a PhD level in all areas or many areas of discipline, once you're able to train one of those, you're able to run millions of instances on the same computing power that you used to create it. So you could sort of imagine these as drop-in virtual workers, and suddenly we could be putting 80 million new virtual workers into the labor force. This is the kind of thing that would be having tremendous impacts. That amount of sort of injection of cognitive capability across all fields of work would be very impactful. A couple of other key parameters, in addition to that one around just the capabilities, are around what's the concentration of actors going to be? Are we going to see one actor or a group of companies pull far ahead of others? Or are we going to see it more grouped? And then another crucial parameter is really around the controllability of these systems. Right now, we know, based on the current approach, the current paradigm for AI, that we don't know how to make them reliably do what humans want. And that has very big implications for the kind of security risks that they could pose in the future. So we take those various parameters and we've woven them into a number of key scenarios. I won't have time to go into those now, but just to step back and take the big picture from that, we think it fundamentally raises 3 sets of truly global scale challenges that we will need to come together as humanity to address in the coming months and years. The first one of those is, how do we realize and share the global benefits of AI? Now, we spoke about access before, but access isn't enough. Imagine the scenario where one company, potentially OpenAI and partners with Microsoft, one company manages to pull far ahead and develop an AI system that is just far, far beyond those of its competitors, and would have strong interest to do so and to maintain that advantage. Well, this is the kind of scenario that I joke that it puts countries like Canada very much in a similar position as most other countries in the developed North and the developed South, that how are we going to ensure that their benefits from such developments would be truly widely shared around the world? The second global scale challenge is around managing the global scale risks. Now, these are the risks that could cross borders. Irrelevant to what you do in your country with AI, if someone else develops an AI system that can be used by malicious actors to cause widespread harm through a new bioweapon or new cyber attacks, or ultimately, if we see this case of where humanity loses control, the loss of control risk, as Yoshua Bengio and others refer to it, essentially, if we build very capable systems that have both the motivations and abilities to pursue objectives that aren't aligned with human interests. And then thirdly, and perhaps most fundamentally, the global challenges around how do we actually ensure inclusive and legitimate and effective decision-making around the kinds of questions that would arise for all of humanity from these kind of most capable systems. Right now, those decisions are being made by a handful of people in a few companies in a few countries. And yet those decisions affect all of humanity. Those questions such as when and under what conditions do we really want to bring into existence AI systems that are significantly further advanced than humans is something that we really need to reflect carefully on and make sure that those decisions are being made inclusively. Lastly, and I'll make this one really short, but it's just when it comes to we don't yet have the institutions that would allow us to deal with these challenges. The United Nations and the Council of Europe and the G7 and the OECD and many, and the EU itself, many very important, impactful discussions and negotiations that have been happening in the last couple of years, and we applaud that, but they are not yet tackling directly some of the challenges that we would see emerging out of the most rapid and most challenging scenarios that we could see from AI. I think we need to, just like we saw with COVID, how the world can suddenly wake up and policy measures and forms of collaboration that would have been unthinkable a few months ago, a few months before, suddenly become feasible. We need now to be preparing in advance what those mechanisms could look like, mechanisms that would actually work, testing them, and then having them ready so that they can be given to leaders when they need them. I think what this means for G7 and G20 and beyond in the coming years is really to be raising this awareness among leaders and among their populations about the need to be taking this proactive approach, preparing for the future, recognizing that we need to be doing that together, while at the same time, I think groups like ourselves in the T7 and T20 community can play a huge role in supporting that work. Thank you.
Many thanks. I think it was very useful contribution to identify the key challenges. So I would like to open the floor and then take a couple of questions, more than two, at least 4 or 5, and then invite our speakers to respond. Please.
Elisabetta Zvanelli, I'm a professor emeritus now at the University of Rome Tor Vergata, and also I'm working in 2 NATO projects on AI, as well as an expert on the United Nations on the roadmap to digital transformation. So I have some experience also of international meetings, also connected with my specific activity on cybersecurity and AI modeling. Now we are working at a number of projects on AI. Let me come to 3 points quickly. I enjoyed very much the last contribution and also the first contribution and the one before the last. I agreed a lot on what was said. The first question is, the reason why we are here to talk about AI concerns the fact that we do not know what AI could do as far as disruption of economic, social rights in the world. So the first challenge, in my opinion, for G7 would be to start thinking about the governance of the governments by high-tech giants. We do not govern as nation states the evolution of artificial intelligence. Let me say, a very banal observation, AI Act is very poorly done. It's ridiculous the way they have defined risk. Risk can be assessed only prospectively at having scenarios. We don't have scenarios. How can we assess risk if we don't have scenarios? Also, the classification of companies according to risks in products and services, ridiculous. just to say a bit, there is a representative by Microsoft. The fact in the biometric control, which is forbidden. But there is a but. It is not forbidden by companies that are already using biometric identification. All giants Microsoft has uses biometric identification. So the way we make laws in this way is ridiculous. And third, there is no possibility of application. I wonder who in Italy now has the competence, the preparation to assess risks in societies and to go and control. It's ridiculous. It didn't work. It doesn't work, not even for cybersecurity. So let me say, let's take it easy. Too much regulation, hyper-regulation, too little and too few competencies. Because at the universities, I would like to know how many courses in artificial intelligence that are worthy of the name. Let me I'll be very quick. One very funny thing. When we talk about AI, we should distinguish between two different areas. ChatGPT is not artificial intelligence. It is fantastic application, of course, but it is not all the artificial intelligence. There is a very dangerous part of artificial intelligence development that has to do with the neural applications. You certainly are familiar with Neuralink. This is a part of artificial intelligence where there is the management of neurons by means of modeling of contents. This is a very dangerous part because we don't know what's going to happen. Whereas for ChatGPT and similar, there are many other applications. ChatGPT can work only on natural language processing. A wider part that has to do with agriculture, military. I'm working on military representation of risks on satellite area. This is, let's say, we can't talk about it. Let me conclude with one thing. Do G7, are they concerned possibly with ethical values? There are no universal ethical values. It's ridiculous. We are comparing East and West and North and South of the world where ethical values are different in time and space. So let's be more modest and say, let's check the process and see who's going to do what, namely what the giants will propose us. This would be a good policy.
Thanks. Please.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm Gennaro Migliore. I'm a former member of Parliament of Government in Italy, and I collaborate as director of a program last year to a reduction of a report on the malicious use of AI and emergency technology by terrorist and criminal group in collaboration with Security Council of the United Nations. But I don't want to ask about security because I guess that there is some other points because we are talking about G7 policies. I appreciate a lot some of the remarks, especially about the divergence between North and South, the divergence among countries that are skilled on AI and so on. But the first question is how to reach this kind of convergence to try to include some other countries, especially if there are developing new technologies, for example, the quantum computer. Because the quantum computer accelerates in a way that we, in this moment, are not able to anticipate also this kind of divergence. And the second is strictly political, because you are talking about the attitude of the next presidency of G7, but there is an elephant in the room. That is the new leadership in the United States, because if we are talking about, for example, about the regulation of and the control of contents in social media, we see a very new approach against the moderation of contents by the most important ally of Mr. President Trump, that is Elon Musk. And I imagine that that is more and more complicated to understand what means the regulation in the new era of this kind of administration. It's also a problem. We know, we all read about it for the over-the-top that try to moderate, to include. I appreciate that after a long time of separation between private and public sector in the last year, even because the public sector and the press against and towards the private sector, the public sector was involved in this. But now we have a new scenario, and of course G7 is strictly dependent by all the countries. In my opinion, Italy had a good job in this field, but the new scenario of the Trump administration, I think that can be worth to take care and to take in account.
Many thanks. We have a question from the virtual. It's more on the supply chain. You took note of that, no? Okay, so it's specifically addressed to you. Then other more general issues that mostly related to the question, what do you see, what type of risk you see are the most worrying? So it's very general, especially in the security field. If you can mention some examples, there seems to be certain widespread concern about the impact of this technology. We have already mentioned that several times, but if you can mention some, in your view, what are the main, most worrying examples of those risks? So we can follow, if you have comments, I will start with you and then in the reverse order. You want to, okay, please.
To answer your question, I think the discussion we have shows so much divergence, not only between the global north and the global south, but even in the west in relation to the future of the G7 under the new US election. And I think it just means that this needs to be, we need to keep this momentum going, because at the moment it's very difficult to avoid the geopolitical tension that is there. And that's only the multilateral forum are the only way in which we can think, let's say, more rationally about it, because competition is right now driving the direction of AI, and that can result in very dangerous situations. And this also results into your question about what is the risk. In my view, military applications are the biggest risk because they are so unregulated. I think the Italian presidency was the first one where military applications of AI was actually mentioned. So this is a really dangerous application, and if the geopolitical tension is driving this, this all the more means that forums like the G7 need to survive. But what does that mean? I think from a European perspective, it's very difficult to only rely on American leadership for the future of global order. I think we need to share this responsibility now all the more. And how do you deal with that divergence, especially when it comes to global south countries that are significant AI powers, is just listening. So that would basically mean more strategic visits to major countries that are actually signaling their AI intentions, So more strategic visits, actually seeing what the AI ecosystem in these countries are, what are the key things? Because I think we have this understanding of, we watch countries from outside, and I think it's important to actually go in and see the different actors there, which will actually result in more engagement. So this would be my immediate response, and I'll stop there.
Karin.
So you're asking about what risks we see as most important. That's a really hard question because we don't know which risks are going to materialize at this point in time. But we did a survey last year of G7 countries, and they unanimously, last year, this was 2023, found disinformation as the most critical risk. We did another survey recently of experts. So we have a network of experts that's focused on future, of which Duncan is a part. And actually, Duncan was the mastermind when he was at the OECD to create this. And this survey, so the expert research, these are experts from research labs, from the public sector, private sector, and academia, and so on. And they identified facilitating a very sophisticated malicious cyber activity as the most important risk, followed by manipulation, disinformation, and fraud, and harms to society, to democracy and social cohesion. So I think that here we do find that the mis and disinformation and the sort of polarization in both the experts and the politicians as a very, very large risk, as well as the cybersecurity risks. When you can automate cyber attacks, and instead of having one person, running a cyber attack, you can have agents all over the world operating operating an attack, attacking one system, for example, in Ukraine, at the same time. So those are two, I think, that are very high up on at least policymakers' agenda.
Many thanks. So it seems that Chloe had to leave. So if you don't want to, it's the same problem with Francesca Bitondo. So I give you the floor for the last one. You want to? Okay.
I just wanted to thank everybody. I'm sorry to jump before you because I need to go for another meeting at 5. But really, very quickly, to first respond very quickly to Elisabetta, right? It's not perfect, but it's a step, I think. I'm saying that as a private company. So for sure, I mean, we don't, how to say, we don't dream of over-regulation, but it's necessary. So even if there are things that can be improved, it's an essential first step. For sure, not the only one. And again, forums like this really allows to keep also the policy framework evolving, but it's an important first step. And coming to the second question, safety and security, I think it's the major risk now. Because, I mean, there is a plethora of risk, of course, from content management also that was mentioned, but this is really, I think, the ground zero when coming to the AI. So the important to really have a safe and secure AI, because if you start breaking that, it's all the castle that is at risk. So this is really, I think, the priority number one, and really share with you also that to see how the geopolitical situation will impact the future conversation, because also this multilateral approach, first the situation is changed, because for sure, I mean, the previous Trump administration was not one of the best, of the strongest supporters of multilateralism as such, but it's also true that the situation has changed a lot, especially on AI. So on some point of view, I think it is needed to continue somehow. Let's see how, but it will be important. And thank you again, everyone, and sorry to go.
Many thanks. Duncan, please.
Okay, well, I will have the job of just almost before sending us off to the end of the event. Let me just speak briefly about risks and then about the elephant in the room. So on the risk side, the first thing I'd like to say is remind us all that if we can get AI right, the benefits are almost inestimable. Just in terms of the productivity gain, but if you think of AI's ability to help us address some of the other global challenges we face, from climate to conflict to even mental health challenges we're seeing. I mean, the potential there is amazing, which is why it's all the more important that we do get it right and that we manage the risks. When it comes to the risks and the harms, I mean, they're widespread, and many of them we're seeing today. I mean, everything from mis and disinformation, which is often at the top of people's minds, but through to bias, to inequalities that are being created, to certain industries and sectors of the economy and jobs that will be affected, right through to concentrations of power, and then right into some of these safety and security issues we were just mentioning. I think a distinction that we like to make is that some of those risks can and probably should be dealt with at the national level, or again by groups of like-minded countries. I think when it comes to content moderation, for example, you could have different approaches between different countries. When it comes to impacts on employment, I think you may be having countries like China or countries in Europe and the United States making different balances in terms of what their societies want and where they want, and we can even learn from each other through those different approaches and coordinate where we can and where we can build consensus. I think when it comes to these truly global scale risks to public safety and security, such as automated cyber attacks that hit the entire world, that is where we really need to come together and work collectively. So let me turn to that question then, the elephant in the room of the new administration in the United States, the upcoming new administration. And I think there we face the issue that uncertainty what their policies will be when it comes to even sort of recognizing some of the potential risks and wanting to regulate them and intervene in that space. There are some signs, as you know, I mean, there's some very kind of libertarian, non-regulatory sides of the incoming administration. We also have people like Elon Musk and others who for a long time have been whatever else, at least raising the issues around safety and security risks on AI. So I think that remains to be seen. One thing that we are seeing a huge amount of in the United States now, and it's cross-partisan support as well, is really a kind of America's got to win the AGI race. Just last week, an advisory committee on U.S.-China relations was strongly advising America to get in and have a Manhattan Project on AGI. And I think that raises some very significant geopolitical, international relations questions for those of you who are specialists in this area around the world, which is how do we convince America and China and others who may be in the leading position in this technology that it is in their self-interest and their mutual self-interest to collaborate and to build some international governance mechanisms around this, because the dangers of just racing towards this technology and cutting corners because you're afraid that if you don't, your competitor will, that is where a huge amount of the risk comes from. And I think we can make the case that it is in their interest to do so, but it will require probably a bit of a concerted push from the rest of us in that case. So I'll leave it at that.
Just a couple of observations. The first, I would just come back to one point that Shireen made at the beginning. So that AI is increasingly seen as an instrument of power. including, of course, by rising powers. So a way of increasing its role influence on the international scene. At the same time, it's very clearly that the dangers of this race is now evident, and there could be a convergent interest in finding some common understanding on how to, if not control, at least try to have some way of at least increase some degree of transparency, a mutual understanding. We see, for instance, one important element was this dialogue between US and China, despite the current clear tensions between the two countries, and the last meeting between Xi Jinping and Biden was also on the idea that they can work together on this objective. For the moment, they have limited themselves to say that they want to assure the human control of nuclear weapons. That's just an element. We are still waiting from Russia a similar declaration, so it's not a foregone conclusion. We should not take it as a foregone conclusion. The point I would like to make is, as you said, the AI is a typical dual-use technology, offers some, not so much a material, of course, as in case of other instruments, as in case of other dual-use technology, but some functions. So it's very difficult to control. The cannot be effective export control is difficult to envisage. But still, I think there are, as you know, several efforts now also at the level of the UN for the first time. There was a UN Security Council resolution, very important, and now the General Assembly for the first time last year included this issue on its agenda, so there could be also a movement in this direction in addition to the formal negotiation that's going on in Geneva. They are not producing significant results, but still we have some frameworks of discussion that need to be considered. Clearly, as you said, is a technology that's moving very fast, and so we should live with that. It's very difficult to identify risks because of this process that's very rapid. But this, at the same, so it's very difficult to be proactive as we want to be. But at the same time, this effort, this work on risks is essential. And this should be done only effectively through the involvement of experts, stakeholders, etc. This is a work that's being done also at the level of the G7, not to speak of the OECD. And so it's important to at least emphasize that this is a project that is going on. And in case of the G7, I would again underline this possibility that this can, through the OECD and other also forums and technical bodies, could be offered also the opportunity to be a channel to involve other countries. That's a point that should not underestimate. A final point on the outreach. So clearly G7 needs to further this outreach effort towards the so-called Global South. So it's important, as we are trying to emphasize, that there is this second line of action, the AI hub for sustainable development. As Claude said, it remains to be seen that the DCA will be able to give a substance to this progress, if it could be, this engagement could be sustained. But in any case, these two elements are part of the same problem of assuring a workable also governance of AI should be complemented. On one hand, the efforts, especially by major powers, to try to have a convergence on global framework, at the same time try to, if not reduce, prevent this huge gap from widening even further. So just we remain, of course, committed at the Institute to furthering this work, and particularly we do that in cooperation with CIGIT, within the framework of the T7. We have already some fruitful contacts to have very soon so-called endover meeting. So a meeting essentially will mark the beginning of your coordination with T7, and certainly digital transformation, AI, given also your expertise and the focus, that the emphasis that your government is placing on the issues will be very central. So thanks a lot all of you for taking part in this conference. There will be further opportunities. Thanks a lot.